Chaga's been used in the far northern hemisphere for centuries. It's been used as a folk medicine that has been a treatment for stomach ailments, respiratory problems. It's been an immune potentiating medicine, and it's been used really as a general kind of longevity, vitality tonic. Now, in more recent times, we've scrutinized Chaga through the scientific lens, and we've seen that it does in fact have immune modulating properties to it, and it's got a lot of antiviral compounds. It has a significant amount of anti-tumor, anti-cancer properties as well. In this video we're going to make what I believe to be the best method for preparing Chaga tea. This is a really hot topic because people get very, very animated about this for some reason. People are very polarized on this. Some people say that you must steep like whole chunks of Chaga in just like warm water for 20 minutes. Some people say you should cook it but not boil it, and you should cook it in that hot but not boiling water for about 30 to 40 minutes. Some people say you should boil it non-stop for 4 to 5 days. It's all over the place, the recommendations. So I've pretty much tried them all, to be honest with you. And yeah, this method is, after all the trials and tests, this is what I believe is the best possible way to prepare Chaga mushroom tea. If we take a look at some pieces of Chaga that I've got here, some people say that it's important to remove the dark, hard, brittle outer skin of Chaga. You see on the inside it's actually a lot lighter, kind of orangey brown color. It's much softer. It's almost got the texture of cork, whereas this side is very, very hard and very brittle. And yeah, a lot of people say we should remove this, but this isn't really the best idea because the outer skin of Chaga contains a lot of betulin. Now, betulin is a chemical that's actually manufactured within the birch tree that Chaga grows upon, and Chaga concentrates that betulin into the sclerotia here, into a much more medicinal potency. Betulin is a very anti-substance, and what I mean by that is it's anti-inflammatory, it's antiviral, it's a potent antioxidant, it's antibacterial, it's anti-malarial, and it has anti-tumor and anti-cancer properties. And it's also what contributes towards modulating or balancing immune function. And betulin also enhances the secretion of bile from the gallbladder, and it increases the cellular absorption of oxygen. So it's really very important that we include this part of the Chaga in the cooking process. And on the other hand, we have the interior of Chaga, which, like I said, is much softer and lighter, and chemically it's composed quite differently. It actually contains a much higher concentration of fungal lanostains, which again have a lot of tumor inhibiting properties, and they also have anti-candida properties as well. So it's really best to prepare this as a whole medicine. Plus we have all of the beta-glucans in Chaga, which are really the key component for its ability to enhance immune function. And the beta-glucans also regulate cholesterol balance, blood pressure, and blood sugar. So this is actually a really good adjunct medicine for diabetics. And the beta-glucans also provide yet more anti-tumor properties. So whether you wild harvest Chaga or you buy it online or whatever, most of the time you're going to get it in chunks like this. Before we prepare this, actually, just a very quick footnote that we need to be sure that we're getting Chaga from a sustainable source. If we're wild harvesting it ourselves, for ourselves, then in most ecosystems, this is not such a problem. When we start to harvest it commercially, we can end up depleting that ecosystem very fast. And Chaga has a very important role to play environmentally beyond providing health benefits to us. So it's very important that we don't deplete it from its natural ecosystems, because Chaga takes a very, very long time to mature. It can take decades before it actually reproduces. So if we're going to be harvesting it before it's had the ability to reproduce, then we're going to be decimating the population of Chaga from that area. So we've really got to make sure that it's coming from a pristine source and a sustainable source, and that's very difficult, to be honest. There's people harvesting it from all over the place, making a lot of money out of it, and at some point there'll be none left. Scotland is a really good example of that. Scotland was very heavily deforested over the last centuries, and chaga dwindled down to almost nothing, and now it's kind of making a little bit of a comeback, and people are already in there harvesting it for commercial reasons. And this is, this is really bullshit in my opinion. I don't really agree with that at all. But if we look at other ecosystems like the vast wilderness of Siberia, a lot of that is pretty much out of bounds to people. So chaga can proliferate there in relative abundance, but still I think commercially speaking, if we're going to be taking Siberian chaga, we still need to put some kind of restriction down on the amount that we're going to harvest and sell per year, and plus if people are selling organic cultivated chaga, the mycelium of chaga is, you can cultivate that quite successfully, but the fruit body, or rather the sclerotia, is pretty much impossible to cultivate at this time. The science really hasn't caught up with that process yet. So, chaga's very, very difficult to cultivate, and what has been cultivated is medicinally very, very poor in comparison to its wild counterpart. Anyway, when we're preparing chaga, we need to be quite heavy-handed because it's very tough, hard, woody kind of substance, so we really need to smash it up. So the first thing we need to do, you need to make sure you have a hammer, an old towel or a rag or something that you don't mind getting a bit beaten up, and we need to wrap the chaga in the towel. So we'll take this piece and we'll wrap it up, fold it over so there's no open ends, because the problem is when you start hammering on this, it shatters and pieces go absolutely everywhere. So that's why we wrap it inside a cloth first of all. Put it on a surface that is going to be able to take the hammering, and actually put it on the floor, because you really don't want to be destroying your work surface. You can do this outdoors, So as you can see, we've broken the chaga down into much smaller pieces, and at this point you've got a couple of options. You could break this down further in a pestle and mortar, which would have been the traditional way of doing it. If you do that, you want to make sure that your equipment is very big, it's very deep, so that you can really put a lot of weight into it. You can have it on the floor, and the deeper it is, the less likely you're going to have pieces of chaga flinging all over the place. And that takes a little while, it takes a bit of work, but that's the traditional way of doing it. I'm going to do it the much more modern way. I've got a Vitamix blender, and you can blend this up, basically grind it into very, very fine powder using a blender like that. But don't try this in a blender with less power to it, because you're going to break it very, very quickly doing that. So really just one of these industrial strength blenders would be the ideal way to do it. So let's chuck it all in there. Okay, so this lot is done, and for 1 gallon of water we're going to need about 80 grams. So over here we've got a gallon of water. Again, make sure you're using a good source of water. Avoid municipal tap water if you can. Now with the lid on, we're going to bring this to a boil. And once it's bubbling away and it's boiling nicely, we're going to lower the heat to a simmer. And traditionally this was cooked for about 4 hours before it was strained off and served. But the thing is, if you grind it into a very fine powder like I've done with the blender, then you're increasing the surface area of the chaga by so much that it becomes very easy to extract all of the nutrients and the beneficial constituents into the water. So I normally find that reducing the cooking time by 1 hour is equally sufficient, so you can basically simmer it. Once it's boiled, you can just simmer it for another 3 hours. Now, traditionally when it was simmered for 4 hours, it was 4 hours, or the liquid has to be reduced by about 75%, so you've only got about a quarter of the liquid left. If you simmer it for 3 hours, you're obviously going to have a little bit more than that left, but it's going to be equally as potent because you've increased the surface area by grinding it up as a very fine powder that's really almost like a flour. If you haven't done that and you're using whole chunks, or if all you've done is kind of smash it up with a hammer and maybe a bit of pestle and mortar, so you'll have a bit of powder and you'll have some bigger chunks, then I would give it the full 4 hours of simmering. And then obviously once it's finished, you can strain it and serve it immediately as a tea, or you can basically store it, strain it and store it in like an airtight glass kilner jar or a mason jar or something like that. And it's going to be good for about 3 days stored in one of these if you store it in the fridge or somewhere cold and dark. And you can use that, you know, as a base for smoothies, as a base really for anything. You can use it as a base for soups or broths. You can use it as water to cook things in. You can cook rice, cook oatmeal, cook anything at all in it. So this is a really good way of turning what would be an ordinary meal into something very potent and medicinal. And this is especially good, I think, when we're trying to feed fussy children. You know, we can actually make what would normally be maybe something of a bland meal into something with a lot of health benefits. So this has been cooking for just under 3 hours, and you can see, hopefully, that the amount of liquid has reduced to less than half of what it was. It was pretty much full, so we can take a look at exactly how rich this is now. It's very, very rich, very dark. It's like black ink now. And, you know, you're not going to get chaga this strong from just steeping it in warm water for like 20 minutes, you know. You're going to get something from it, but nothing like this. This is like so rich and thick and dark. You can see. That's the good stuff. And it's also important to remember that you can recook this same chaga. So once you've drained off all of the liquid from this first cook, you can top it up again and cook it like another 2 or 3 times really before it's completely finished. But the thing is, you don't need to cook it for the same amount of time, because that first longer cooking duration has broken down a lot of the tough fibrous chitin within the mushroom. So a lot of the cells are already open and ready to offer what they contain, all of the nutrients and all of that stuff. So you only really need to, you know, bring it back to a simmer and simmer it for like another 30-40 minutes or something like that. And it's going to give you another pretty strong tea again. After about 2 or 3 cooks, you'll notice that the water isn't so dark, it's not so opaque, and it's actually fading quite a lot, and that's a good indication that this is actually getting quite weak now and it's pretty much spent. Obviously we could take this to much more of an extreme if we were doing it in an industrial setting and we had all kinds of apparatus at our disposal, but if we're just making this at home, this is the best, simplest and most accessible folk method of preparing chaga tea that I know of. So hopefully this has been useful. If you've got any comments or criticisms, please feel free to leave them down in the comments below. Take it easy, and I'll talk to you again soon.